Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Lohman. I'm the director and CEO of the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and I'm actually inside of Savor, the wonderful exhibition that originated up in Toronto at the Gardner Museum and then came to these shores at the very last days of February and was open to public view for a couple of weeks before we shut down, and then has been reopened this past month. The Wadsworth is now open noon to 5, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday every week. And people are coming back and they're enjoying all of our shows, including Savor. I'm actually up here in the show because I wanted to give you a sense of what the show looks like and maybe an opportunity to do something a little fun. So I apologize if this is hokey, but tonight's speaker is a great ceramist, a great friend of the institution, a great friend of the field, and many of her works are featured in the show, including this wonderful pineapple picture. And we were just chatting before going live moments ago about how this talk originally was supposed to happen during pineapple season, but instead we've had to postpone it. Luckily, Kate also made us a pumpkin. So, the pumpkin from about 18 years ago by the great Kate Malone. We're delighted that we've been able to virtualize a lot of these programs and keep the show alive in your minds and in your living rooms. We do hope to host you here at the museum. The show runs until early January, but don't delay. Come out. We've been hosting the public safely and comfortably now for about 6 weeks, and we'd be delighted to see you. And so I'll leave you with a parting shot, panning around through the show, maybe some memories to those of you who have been to see the show, and maybe another reason to come for those who have yet to visit. Good luck, and I turn over the program to others. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. My name is Linda Roth, and I'm the Senior Curator and Curator of European Decorative Arts at the Wadsworth Athenaeum. I want to thank you all for joining this this early evening event. As Tom said, our exhibition Savor, A Revolution in Food Culture is at the Wadsworth in Hartford, Connecticut, for those of you who are not local, until January 3rd. And so anyone who can get here, we would love to have you come and see the exhibition. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Kate Malone. Kate Malone is one of the leading British ceramic artists. Over her distinguished career spanning 30 years, she has earned accolades for her large sculptural work and rich, bright glazes. Kate Malone studied at Bristol Polytechnic and the Royal College of Art before establishing a studio in London. Kate Malone's work is held in many public collections all over the world, including a high-profile giant ceramic fish in the water at Hackney Marshes and a signature large pot at Manchester Art Gallery, and works at the Ashmolean, the Victoria and Albert, and the LA County Museum of Art. In 2015, Kate created 10,000 hand-glazed ceramic tiles with EPR Architects on a project at 24 Savile Road, which was awarded a first-place WAN Facade Award. Kate has been the subject of numerous monographic exhibitions, including a 2016 solo exhibition at Wadsworth Manor called Inspired by Wadston. Kate was appointed member of the Order of the British Empire in the 2019 birthday honors for services to ceramic arts. Kate also serves as a judge on BBC Two's The Great Pottery Throwdown. She lives with her husband and daughter in North London, where she also has her studio. She also has a studio in Kent, as some of us know. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, Kate.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. And I can't believe some of those things that you've said, but it seems that I'm still a young person, which I'm not, in a playroom of my pottery. And so to hear all that is just fantastic. And thank you so much to the Wadsworth for inviting me and for having my pieces in their exhibition. When I think about how pieces are cared for and loved in museums, it is fantastic. It's a great feeling as a maker to know that they're tucked up in bed and often put out. And so I'm very glad to see that the pumpkin, I think she's called May West pumpkin, I'm not sure, and the pineapple pitcher, you say, it is there. So, well, I think we'll probably, you know, it's 10 o'clock in England, and happily my beautiful PA, Sakit Khan, is with us as well. And we often work until late at night together, remotely at the moment, obviously, given the crisis that's happening, really. And my first, we're going into a PowerPoint now, so I believe you can see me a little bit, which is great, and the images here. And I looked up the word savor. And in fact, we've got a U in ours, I think, when we see savor, but I noticed your exhibition is savor without the U. So I'm not quite sure. It's probably because I've lived and worked in France. I love to sing the voir. But anyway, the definition that I got immediately when I put it into my Google, just to clarify things, is to enjoy or appreciate something pleasant to the full, especially lingering over it. And I suppose we can practice that now. I hope you're all comfortable at home. I believe you've had some rain that's well looked forward to. But I really hope that we can savor this evening, and I can sort of, I think giving a talk like this helps me appreciate and to savor things that sometimes when we're rushing through our day's activities and trying to manage the problems that we all have at the moment, we must not forget to savor things. And I think the lockdown has given us, a lot of us, a chance, you know, the severe lockdown, we're on semi-lockdown here, to appreciate things. So here we go into image number 1. So can we have the next image, please? So this is an épernier. And I think when I thought about the word savor, I think this is the image of all my career that I think sort of says it all. The British Council had an exhibition of a whole dinner service that toured all the diplomatic embassies of the British Council of the world. And they had dinner settings by different British makers. And they asked me to make the épernier, which means which is the centerpiece, which you might have had sugared almonds and things from the side. And I was 7.5 months pregnant when I made this piece, and it's a big piece. It really was, you know, when you make, it's big, and then it shrinks about 12 to 14%. But those are full-sized fruits. They're not miniature fruits; they're real fruits. It was a long time ago. So when I was pregnant, that would be 97. And in fact, I think we went out and spent £100 at Harrods to get the best possible fruits that we could. And there was a lot of fruit eaten that day for the photograph. And in fact, I haven't had a digital version of this picture. I've only got it in poster form. This was the poster for the British Council. And it was back in the day before digital, so it was a big transparency. And I took the poster specially to my local fine art framers, and they've got a big scanner, and they scanned it for me specially for our talk today. So I'm very glad now to have this back in my sort of stable of images. And it's a great reminder of this great mother pineapple, a symbol of hospitality, friendship, and prosperity. There are 4 little baby pineapples sitting on her hips. I did only have one child. I didn't have quadruplets, but I remember making that and feeling the sort of hefty weight of pregnancy, savoring it really. And you can see that in the piece. Next, please. So this is it. This is a photograph of the bucket of clay, or the casket of clay, in my pugging room. And this is the stuff. This is what the planet makes, more clay every day than we can ever use. It may not be where we want it or of the type that we want it in the place that we want it, but the planet is a great clay making machine. And clay is, I'm sure most of you know, it's brother and sister of granite and sand, of stone and sand. Obviously there are other things mixed in, but it is the earth. It is the salt, if you like, of the earth. And it's used in so many ways that we're not quite aware of in our lives. In fact, it's in our toothpaste and in our makeup and in our medicines and in our car engines and in our computers, as well as in our decorative arts. And when I work with children, I get them to name 20 things that they use every day that's made of clay. You might want to do that at home at some stage. So next slide, please. Next image. And it's clay, and it's about the hand. And I think one of the great things about being a decorative artist is that I feel that I'm brother and sister to makers throughout time. Because I'm sure some of the pieces in your exhibition, when you see the fingerprint, or you see the sort of imprint of a hand or a finger, or literally the pieces you have are often so refined that the hand is kind of hidden, but it's all there. There are hundreds and thousands of hours of handwork in the pieces I know that are in your exhibition there. And some of my pieces do have hundreds of hours in, but it really is about the hand. And makers they make friends through their work across time and space. So no matter where we are in the world, Instagram's just such a fantastic tool. But I connect a lot with American ceramists and Australian ceramists that I would never have known. But we connect through our craft, and these hands are such a brilliant tool. Next, please. And here we have the tools. In fact, this is the way that we savor these simple tools every day in the studio. Before lockdown, before this COVID, I would be normally working alongside 4 assistants in either of my studios in Kent or in London. And we'd work side by side using the same tools from the same tool trolley. And at the end of the day, they would get washed up and laid out like this on a fresh tea towel. And in the morning, they'd be put away back in the right place so that we could all use the tools, fighting over some of them actually, but that you can see they're just simple tools, knives and hacksaw blades and wooden tools. Next, please. And so with this clay and with these hands and with these tools, and I'm going to also talk about with my assistants, I'm going to talk about the community that I work with. I work in 3 areas of ceramics. Firstly, I work in public art. Well, not firstly and primarily, but I'm just listing them: public art, decorative art, and glaze research. So I'm going to just show you the sort of scope of that now. Next, please. And really, this is the studio, this is the decorative arts, and this was a studio, I lived in Barcelona for 2 years, 2009 to 2011, and I had a dungeon with no windows right next to the Picasso Museum in the Gothic Quarter. And this is a bulk of work that was made, that's in the process of being made, that was shown at Dover Street Gallery in 2011, I think. And you can see the plaster molds underneath the trestle table and the small little pieces of clay that we used as stamps. And you can see different pieces in different state of bisqueware and dried. So I think you probably mostly know with ceramics, you take your clay, you make something by throwing or modeling or coiling or hand building, then you let it dry, and some of these pieces are dried. The fennels at the top right-hand side, they're half dried, and you can see they're lighter at the top and darker at the bottom as they dry. And some of the pieces are just part made, but you let it dry, and when the atmospheric air is driven off, you put it in a kiln and you drive off the chemical water. So the atmospheric water is driven off by the atmosphere, the chemically combined water is driven off by the kiln, and it's at about 670 degrees. I'm not sure exactly the number. The quartz crystallizes and you turn clay into ceramic, which is then really as long lasting as you know. I think some of the earliest ceramics is 25,000 years old. So although it might chip or break into pieces, it never really disappears compared to other materials. And so it's really great evidence of man's impression on material that exists that I'm besotted with, actually. Next image, please. And these are some of the decorative pieces that I've made. This is in the sort of the first section, if you like, of I make things in my studio. This piece was made for Wadsworth, and it's actually a portrait of Miss Alice, who is Ferdinand Rothschild's sister. And she loved gardens, and she loved trellis works, and she loved French. I think it's de la Fosse handles. She collected, the Rothschild collected a lot of architectural and furnishing sketching. So the handles are taken from furniture, and the trestles are taken from Wadsworth architecture, and the daisies are from Ethrop. And the pumpkins, of course, is that Miss Alice grew this fantastic garden at Waterston Manor, which is one of the great stately National Trust homes of England, a Rothschild house. And I could talk for a whole hour about Wadsworth. I think it was a place, if you look at the next slide, maybe there'll be another one from Wadsworth. No, there isn't actually. So let's go back to Wadsworth. Really, I think it's the most important exhibition of my life, in that I was invited into the house, into the National Trust house, which is a beautiful French chateau style house built in the 1890s in England. And I was allowed access all areas. I stayed the night there several times. I studied and read and looked at maps of the countryside before the house was built and made pots based on those things. It was a very intense exhibition. I made 55 pieces, and this is one of the crowning pieces of the exhibition for Wadsworth Manor. Next, please. Now, if you see this is an erupting magma bowl. It's quite a big piece. And my husband often comes into the studio and says, it's like this whole wall of pots that are being made, if they're in half in the process, are made by different artists, because this is so different. But in fact, all my work is about nature and about the magic of nature. And in fact, I did have a period of work where I made things about the sea, which was nature underwater. And then I made work about nature underground or in the ground, which is fruits and vegetables and things. And now a big part of my work is about the abstract sense of the life force, but also about nature underground in the magma, bubbling away 250 miles down beneath our feet in the center of the earth. And these I've been studying crystal formations in the Natural History Museum. And so these are inspired by nature itself. So often I'll make pineapples and blackberries and pumpkins. And then on the other side, it's about the life force, the sort of miracle of nature and the abstract sense of this sort of molecular level and crystalline level of nature. Next, please. And here we have a sort of little selection of a pine cone lying on its side and a pumpkin, and a sort of atomic pieces with balls and bubbles. So those pieces with the balls on are very much about the atom and the miracle that the atom is. And then at the back, there's a sort of artichoke, and then there's a white piece, which was called Snow Lady Gourd, which was a fusion, a sort of genetic fusion of lots of different fruits and vegetables. So really, I spend my indulgent time, my really indulgent time is making things at my desk that I'm inspired by nature or the abstract sense of it. Next, please. And this area is that's my dog, who passed away a couple of weeks ago, I'm afraid. He was 17 years old, Booba. And this is my Glaze Archive wall in London. And for 30 years, I started at quite a slow pace of mixing glazes. Every single glaze color has a recipe, much like a cake has a recipe of different mineral. Cake has flour and sugar and fats, but glazes have silica and glass and clay content and coloring agents. And so I've worked for 30 years creating a huge library of a particular window of glaze activity, which is called Crystalline Glazes. And they're high fired. They're fired to 1,263. There's a kiln on at the moment with a big pumpkin in it. I'm still making pumpkins out in the barn. And essentially, I read about crystalline glazes. If we go to the next slide, so this is my palette that you're looking at here. There's my palette, and there are buckets on the lower left. So I have a sort of palette and a recipe book, and then as I want the colors, they get mixed in 2 or 3 or 4 liter buckets, and they get stored. And that's my sort of, it's like having tubes of paint, but I have buckets of glazes. The fascinating and enthralling and overwhelming sometimes feature of glazes is that You might paint a pale pink chalky glaze onto a pot. I hand apply all my glazes. And when you put it in the kiln and fire it to top temperature, and it comes out blue, or a deep dark terracotta red glaze will come out pale, pale honey. So when you're glazing, you're kind of having to retain this transformation, which is so magical and so enthralling while you're doing it. Next, please. And here we have the crystals, bottom left-hand side. So glazes, well, they can be matte, they can be shiny, they can be gunmetal, they can be all sorts of things. But essentially, I love shiny glazes. Don't know why. I feel that the movement of glazes over a form emphasizes the form. And the pieces that are in the exhibition, you'll see that if you go to see the Savor exhibition. But my fascination is with crystals. So normal glazes will melt or mature, and you'll turn your glaze off and the kiln will cool. But what you do with crystalline glazes, and there's quite a big movement of them in America of crystalline glaze enthusiasts, is you control cool. And because you have a specific recipe in your glaze, very high in zinc, you actually grow crystals during the cooling cycle. So these blue crystals in the left-hand side illustrate that. The crystals seed and then they grow in the same way as an emerald or a diamond or a piece of coal, black coal, grows in the Earth's crust because of mixing of ingredients and then heating and cooling and then slow cooling and heating and cooling. That's how crystalline things emerge. And so with crystalline glazes, you simulate that volcanic activity in the cooling cycle of the kiln. And some crystalline glaze enthusiasts might spend 3 weeks cooling so slowly that they might get crystals this big. I've heard about them. I haven't seen them. But my interest is this magic. So clay is magic. The transformation of clay to ceramics is magical. Nature is magic in that you plant a seed and things grow. And in a way, these crystalline glazes seem to be appropriate to the natural inspiration subject of my work. So I've ridden with it and I'm still developing new colors. I've just started testing with antimony with some of my other colors, and I'm getting this milk pearly sort of lilac color with antimony. So, and we use copper and iron and cobalt and manganese and vanadium and minerals like that to color these base glazes. Next, please. I think I might have to speed up. So here we are. So now we're sort of moving into big pots territory and possibly public art, hopefully. Could we have the next slide, please? So there's the pineapple, symbol of hospitality and prosperity. There's a great big garlic and a big gourd in the making. That wasn't that long ago, actually. I'm 61, and I think that must have been when I was about 51, but I look about 31, I think, because I'm so happy and complete when I'm amongst these pieces, when I'm coiling them and making them. It's really when I'm most happy and feel most myself. Next, please. And here we are, going back in time. This is a pair of pots made for the Old Bailey in the City of London, for the offices, to sort of try and humanize the offices as you go into the reception of the Old Bailey. And this was called Mother and Daughter, using symbolism. With the pumpkin and the pineapple that you have at the Wadsworth, a pumpkin is a symbol of fertility and fecundity and nature, Mother Nature for me. And this piece had pumpkins, pineapples for your hospitality and prosperity. There's a bee for industry and a lotus for long life. So I'm very interested in how different natural images can be symbolic. Next, please. These are coiled pots. And here's the fish that Linda mentioned so kindly earlier. And I'm very interested in community. So working in public art as well as making decorative arts really fulfills a sort of potter's need in me of fulfilling and serving function. And so these are English freshwater fish rising up out of some disused filter beds in Hackney Marshes, and they're for children to come and study nature and art together. Next, please. And this, again, in the balance of making, so this is, we're going in, so we've looked at decorative arts, we've looked at the glaze library, which feeds both other subjects. And glazing really I spend about 20% of my time trying to work out new glazes and maintain old glazes, because materials are changing all the time these days. And so the public art really serves communities. And I think it's not about me, it's about the community where the public art is placed. And this is in a children's library in Brighton. And it was called Wall of 1,000 Stories. And it was based on improvised storytelling that I used to tell my daughter Scarlett. And I used to ask her to pick 3 things. And then I'd still tell stories to her at bedtime, trying to make her better or kinder or cross the road more safely or brush her teeth, or various sort of things that you want to teach your children through stories, as well as having fun. And so this is a storytelling device in a children's library that's still being used so much. And it's really very rewarding to have a piece that's interactive with the community. Next, please. And this is also a storytelling wall in a street opposite a school. And there were 4 great big walls. It took 2 years to make this in my little London studio. Next, please. And it's called The Wall of Limitless Stories. And there's Joe putting up the grout on that. It was the American Express headquarters for Europe. And it's the back side that was facing a school. So you can see there's a hand in the sort of center left. And every square meter, there's a sort of image. And also you can't see it so well here. Maybe in the next slide, if you go to the next slide, please. Oh, no, you can't. So we go back to the other one. Essentially, there are fossils and imprints made by all the children in the community that were in the school. And there was a deaf association and a blind association in the area. And there were nurseries. And so maybe 500 or 600 people made a single piece each in this wall, and they go back and visit it, and they can tell stories using all the images that are sort of hidden in there. Next, please. The challenge with public art is that it's 5% inspiration and 95% perspiration. The actual technical side of hanging things and making sure they're not going to fall off and hurt people and injure people. And this project is very moot for that. And this is the facade of number 24 Savile Row in Mayfair, London. And I worked with EPR architects and with Rich Miller of Froyle Tiles, who I brought into the project. And we clad a 7-story, 2 buildings, producing 1,500 litres of hand-sieved glazes that were shipped out to Farnham, about 70 miles outside London, and applied to a German tile that we researched. It was 2 years of research and 2 years of production, and 4 years out of my life that I can't really remember much about it, because it was a bit of a whirl, actually. I formed a limited company to protect my home and family, obviously, because this facade was big time. It cost £1.5 million. They heralded it as the most expensive square metre facade in London. And it is crystals. If you go to the next slide, please, hopefully we'll see it. So you can begin to see it here. There's the blue building, the black building on the right, and the white building on the left, which bridges a corner and goes a long way up the street. But essentially every single mechanically hung tile, they're not glued to the walls, they're hung on a rack, are crystalline. And Savile Row is really about the best tailoring in the world, they say, the most famous tailoring street in the world. And this was supposed to sort of echo the standards and the qualities and the beauty and the depth of material of Savile Row's suit. And so the crystalline tiles, which you really have to sort of see them in front of your face to see what's going on. Maybe on the next slide we'll see that. This is the placement of slides, the architectural placement of the different whites. We had a white facade, and we couldn't have too many whites clustered, so it was a very planned project. Next, please. Hopefully we're going to see a tile. No, we're not going to see a tile. You'll have to go to Savile Row and see it yourselves. But evidently the whole building refracts light, because crystals, play with the light. So night and day, it sort of has this depth and this quality that I think is a very beautiful quality. And so I spend a lot of the time traveling. So we've talked about the 3 areas that I work in. Just going to check the time. We're okay for time, I think. And I spend a lot of time traveling with my family. If you go to the next slide, please. And this is a little map of India, quite an old one, actually. I've done a few more trips since then. But all those black lines are the trips that we've done, traveling India. And I find, aside from nature, I find Indian tradition and art and culture totally fascinating and a great inspiration. Really, it's the quality of the art that inspires me, and the spirituality. Next, please. So there we are, my husband and I. That's quite a while ago, because my daughter's 23 now. She must be about 14 or 15 there. I think we are in Mumbai Airport, when it just opened. Our friend Rajiv Sethi designed a lot of that airport, so we were looking around. But we took off, and we take off whether Scarlett had her exams or not. She famously in her CV now says that she did all her revision on night trains going around India, and it's quite true, actually. We did challenge her learning, but we did and do have a lot of fun. Next, please. And in fact, I often, because I have this team of assistants, and this is Mary O'Malley, who works outside New York, and who comes over to England and works with me when she comes to England. She studied at the Royal College of Art. Mariah Mehmet, who's my London workshop manager. Anna Barlow, who I've worked with longest of all, maybe 17 years, and myself. And I took them all to India. I took a whole group of them to India, because often I'd disappear and say, bye, you know, have a nice time back in my studio, mix these glazes, prepare this clay, you know, produce these hollow balls that are kept in plastic, and I'd go off and have a great time. But I took them with me this time, and we set up our studio in India at the first ceramic triennale to show the Indian potters. And Indian potters are on the cusp of a studio ceramics revolution, actually. There's a new, or before COVID really, there was a great pace of new studio potters, people with a little bit of spare time and a bit of money to learn, just on the cusp of beginning to produce some pretty fine work. Because obviously in ceramics in India, there's a big divide, because ceramics is not valued. It costs £1, you know, and it's normally a food container. And ceramics doesn't really have a huge tradition of culture in India. So next, please. And there we were setting up. And we work with children. We work with hundreds of children. We work with students from design colleges. We set up our studio and worked. Next, please. And here we are making with some of the kids, looking at nature and observing things around, taking Indian traditional pot shapes and doing that. Next, please. And here are the traditional shapes that we started as a starting point, raised out of metal. Next, please. I'm going to whiz through these, and here's our portrait. We took a photographer with us and recorded it. You can see a lot of the trip on Instagram and some of the films. It's quite a while ago now. There's no date there, but I think it was 3 years ago, because the second Indian Ceramic Triennale was due to happen this year. And there we are. Next, please. My fantastic girls. And here we have a palace in Gujarat. So a lot of the Indian things that I've seen have influenced my work greatly. And you'll see the balls here. This was a Maharaja's palace that was decrepit and derelict. And these really inspired my work. You can see the top of the Miss Alice pot that I made for Wadsworth Manor. You can see the influence there of the cover and the lid. Next, please. And here you can see the influence there. This is a garniture. And the stripes on the bodies of these pots that are like peacock feathers on the white lower bodies, like their dresses, like these pots are wearing shawls, are actually glaze that's fallen through the air from the balls and landed on the skirt of the pot. So I didn't put the glaze there at all. The central one shows that very well. And that's inspired by being in India during the monsoon and seeing these great rolling clouds arrive and pour out their water. Next, please. Here are more of those roofs in Gujarat. And there's a piece made in Barcelona much later with quite a Gothic and Gaudi or Muntaner influence. I was very interested in Gaudi's teacher, Muntaner. And so there's a sort of fusion between being in India and living in Barcelona. Next, please. I've set up studios in 3 places in the world: in the south of France, in Provence, in a cave, in Barcelona, in a dungeon, and then, well, in the UK, and I have a small studio in central London, and now quite extensive studios in Kent. For the first time in my life, I have space. And this is Gomneshashwara in Sevarang in Karnataka. He's carved out of the tip of a mountain. He wasn't moved there, he was carved from the tip of a mountain. You can see the size of him. He's supposed to have been standing so still that the plants have grown up his arms and legs whilst in meditation. And I've visited him about 5 times so far. Apart from my husband, he's the most fabulous man in the world. And it's his toenail. You can't, I wonder if we can see it in the next slide. It might be in the next slide. Next, please. No, it's not. But it's his toenail, which is so pure, the carving of the line of his toenail and the cuticle on his toenail, which is about this size, you know, it's huge. I think you can still see me. It's that purity of carving and also the chola bronzes of the south of India that inspire me when I'm working in my studio to have a clarity of line. So this pumpkin stem, which is much developed from the pumpkin piece that you have there at the Wadsworth, is I'm trying to concentrate and focus on the purity of line of those chola bronzes that are very inspiring. And this piece on the left is a lotus. Next, please. And that's a wooden pumpkin bought in Cochin, a spice box for peppercorns. And there's the front cover of my monologue, which is now some more than 20 years old, produced by Bloomsbury, of the first 20 years of my working life. And you can see there's a very strong parallel there. Next, please. And I collect things as I go around. I savor the fact that even the sort of the hair slides or the hair ties of the street children, in fact, they don't make this so much anymore, the dreaded plastic in India or anywhere. But I've got this collection of bits and bobs that get used, that influence my work greatly. And they're in this lovely French typesetting chest in my study. Next, please. And this is the Golden Palace in Bangkok. I've probably had about 6 trips to Thailand at various times, not for a long time, but this really left a great impression on me in that it's a big thing. It's a giant temple. It's the Golden Temple in Bangkok, but it's made of small elements. And it's that which really made me realize that I could do large-scale public projects, not necessarily in one giant piece, which is quite difficult technically with ceramics, although I do aspire to make an 8-meter high pot, but that's another story, a storytelling pot. Maybe the Wadsworth would like one. But the whole thing was that these are tiny pieces that are brought together to a whole. And so the storytelling wall in Brighton is really a moot point of that. That whole, for any makers out there who are listening, that whole storytelling wall in Brighton was made in a small top-loading kiln. And I went to the maximum width that the kiln would allow. I think I borrowed a friend's kiln because I didn't have a big kiln at the time to make the pencils and the rulers that were a bit longer. But essentially, it was made in a small kiln. You don't have to. I mean, in England especially, we're not used to having big, hefty equipment. I know Americans are much better at that than we are. Next, please. So we just skip past, there's, yeah, thank you, Jana. That's on the left, that's a part of a pillar that had fallen down in an ancient 2nd century BC Buddhist site called Sanchi in Madhya Pradesh in India. And on the left, I was, during the time that I was working on Wadsworth Manor, this is some passementerie from the furnishings and the curtains in Wadsworth Manor. I mentioned I had a big project there where I studied for 2 years. I'd studied and I went off to India for a month and I saw this piece in Sanchi and came back and brought them together. I think in the next image you'll see what I made. Hopefully ours. This is to do with knotting and twisting with the passementerie, which is an ancient French, well, I think it was derived in France, in Lyon with silks. Next, please. And these pieces have developed into rope pieces. So I am dodging about a bit here. So you had that Sanchi tassel, and I did make a pot that you can see on my art dealer's pots for sale section, Adrian Sassoon, and we're going to talk about him in a minute if we have time. And this is Teyam ceremonies in southern India. There's a little area of 40 kilometers square, and they practice these Teyam ceremonies that have been going on for 3,000 years in every cool season. And you have this caste of families who do very specific activities where they leave their body and gods enter them and they become oracles. And their costumes, to me, these are ceremonies that go on for 36 hours. And they start in the morning and go right through a night into the next day. And often we'll be in India and we'll go to bed and wake up at 3 in the morning and get in a rickshaw and travel through the jungle to a specific Teyam and see these ceremonies and fire walking and all sorts of things. But the thing that I really love are these crafted costumes. And you can see the daisies that are actually made out of palm fronds and dried leaves. Sometimes they're made out of fresh leaves. Here you've got hubcaps and sweetie wrappers and all sorts of things brought in to make the costume, and drinking straws and things. Next, please. And it's really this sort of assembling of small pieces that I find fascinating. So this is a tiny little pot, a porcelain surface pot. Every single porcelain daisy is cut out with a little cutter. And in fact, you often see potters, well, you know, more recently I've seen potters using these stamps. They're made by Party, and it's wedding cake cutters. And you get them in small, medium and large, but actually this is a technical feat to roll the porcelain thin enough. I join it onto my porcelain, onto my stoneware body and attach every single flower, scratching the back of every daisy and pushing it on with the end of a rounded paintbrush. And then the glazing is very specific. You can see here the detail of the different colors that are filled in to each daisy. And it's really that meditation, if you like, of making that is so enthralling. And I like making best. Glazing is more of a challenge, and we can talk about that another time. Next, please. But it's bringing together all these influences. This is a merchant's house in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in India. And here are all these daisies again, repeating, and it's timeless. I think this is 17th century. This is a courtyard in quite a derelict house in Ahmedabad, in a merchant's house. Next, please. And here's a piece being made. That was a big pumpkin. And technically quite porcelain. I don't use porcelain very much. I tend to use stoneware. I relate to the country feel of stoneware more than I relate to porcelain. But really, porcelain is the most challenging material. Every single impression, every fingerprint, every knife mark is shown in porcelain. And I find that a challenge. I like a challenge. Next, please, Jenna. And so here are more pieces. This is a parasite on a tree in India, I think. It might be in Australia. And on the right is a rowanberry pattern. I studied Bailey Scott Arts and Crafts House in the Lake District. But you can see there's a sort of comparison of this clustering. And so it's this traveling, whether it's culture or nature, that I find so fascinating. Next, please. And I'm a bit of a workaholic. I work far too much. So when we travel, it's a time when we get space to do things, time to think and time to meditate on the important things and savor travel. And this is, I won't talk about it too much, but I'm working with KVIC, which is an organization in India, a government organization set up on Gandhi's principles of empowering villagers by giving them craft skills. And in fact, my husband and I have done quite a few trips now, going and teaching the most basic of potters and talking to them about decoration and identity of the work that they make that is often very anonymous. On the left here, there are pots that would cost 30 or 50 rupees, 50 pence, $1. And a man unpacking his kiln there on the right-hand side. But they often don't have time, and it's not their identity of the maker or the regional identity of the pieces doesn't really show. And I've been looking at that with KVIC and a big educational institute called Agastya in India. And that takes up a lot of my mind and heart. Next, please. Because it's so lovely to travel and to meet people of a similar mind with a love of clay. So here we are. I hope I'm not taking too much time, but let's whiz next in here. So we're talking about savoring the movement of glaze. So the glaze that I use is quite liquid. And you can see by this drip how liquid it is. And that describes and draws to me the contours of something. Next, please. My mum used to wear fishnet tights. And I remember marveling at the way the diamonds of the fishnet tights on her legs would change size and relate to her calf muscle or her knee by obviously the stretching of this fishnet, which in fact is like the pineapple diamond. And so I love the sort of way form distorts surface, distorts the way glaze can describe surface. So here we have a piece from my sea period, and here we have the glaze dripping off that starfish. This is called Starfish Pie Dish, and it opens up, it's a box. Next, please. And here are more drips. This is a bay on the lid of Ferdinand Rothschild's cover on the pot that I made, a portrait of him. He loved bay, and this is a vermiculite pattern on the portal of Wadsworth Manor. And there are also bay modeled there. Next, please. But it's about movement of glaze. This is part of an artichoke. And at the tip of each artichoke leaf, I would have put a tiny dot of that purple grey glaze. And it's only during the firing that it's found its way and described the form and the modeling and the surface to a high degree. Next, please. And this is the way that I glaze. I started this technique really by in poverty. I couldn't afford large buckets of glaze, and I couldn't afford a spray booth. And I was testing glazes right from the start, and I'd have tiny coffee cups from the canteen that were saved, and I'd mix tiny samples of different glazes and have them. And instead of throwing the leftovers away from making a test tile, I'd use them on pots. And so a pot might have 30 different greens on it or 20 different blues because I was testing them at the time. And if you go to Adrian Sassoon's website and you go into the work sold section of my section, my art dealer's section of my work, you can actually scroll back through time and you can see when I was researching the blacks for Savile Row and the whites for Savile Row, and when I was researching blues and honeys, because the pots really reflect that, using up and trying to sort of take advantage of the time that's spent mixing every single recipe to test a color. And they're paintbrushes that get painted on. This is the end of the evening, probably 2 o'clock in the morning on the left-hand side, and all the brushes being chucked in to be washed. Next, please. It's quite strange talking to a computer screen at 10 o'clock at night in Kent. I hope you're enjoying yourselves. Next, please. So running, moving, flowing, running. That's how I described my life before lockdown. It's quite a bit more sitting and gardening, anyway, savouring things. So here we have the movement of the glaze inside the pot. And on the left-hand side, the little insert, I will have put dots in the pot and fired and let the glaze find its way to the bottom. Next, please. Savouring communities. Next, please. And here we are, my little tiny studio where I worked. I fired that kiln. You can see the big door of the kiln open in the back room there. 2,100 times. I have the logbooks. And that is where my office was. My kitchen was where the cameraman is standing. And I slept upstairs. I used to work into the night. I do a double day. I work 10 in the morning till about 6 in the evening. And normally then I work from sort of 8 or 9 in the evening till 2 in the morning. And really that I could hear my husband snoring asleep upstairs. And I'd be working on these 2 benches. And people used to come to my studio and say, where's your main studio? I say, this is it. So if there are any makers out there who are short of space, and again, space in England is a different thing to space in America, but urban makers, you know, you can manage in a very tight and small space if you're organized. And in fact, this was a photography session set up so you could see the mugs on the right through to the large scale pieces there. And there's the tool trolley halfway between the cameraman, between me and the kiln room. Next, please. And here I am with my team. So I employ 9 people. part-time, and they're all makers in their own right, very clever. And we develop skills together. And often they bring the best out of me because I have to practice well and pull them forward, and then they pull me forward. So it's a very lovely thing that I really savor, is my community. We all have our communities, and of course, first and foremost, there are families, and then we have professional communities, academic communities, working communities, local residential communities, and so on and so forth. And it spreads. We've got our internet, our Instagram community now, which I really enjoy. My motives for Instagram is about sharing my subject and my techniques. It's not about selling. I'm very happy to say that my wonderful art dealer, Adrian Sassoon, deals with that side of things, and I deal myself with the architectural projects. But here we are chatting away, looking and developing something. Erica from Hungary, and Marai, who's a Londoner. Next, please. And this community, here we are. So that's Helen now, who has a pottery in Tobago at Pigeon Point. She left, bottom right-hand side. Annabella is about to have a baby in 3 weeks' time. Erica from Hungary at the back left-hand side, and myself. This was a pair of pots that are in New York now. I know exactly where they are because I had the pleasure of seeing where the person who bought it has put them, which is always a great thing, because pots are always orphans until they find a home. And they're very complete when I see them in people's homes. And this was a grand pair of pots that sit either side of a fireplace. And the idea is that the bubbles are rising. So the four of us will have been glazing that pot solidly for 3 days to get the glaze in the right place where we wanted it. Next, please. I'm gonna have to speed up. I'm enjoying myself. I'm savoring the moment, actually. What's happened to my phone? Okay, so we're gonna whiz through these last 15 images. My studio is there. That's a village called Cotignac in Provence, where in 2001 we moved, and we put our daughter in the village school. And well, dead center, a little bit down, there's a dark window with shutters on either side with an orange house to the right. That was our kitchen, and that was actually on the 7th floor of the house. And you can see the cliffs there, the petrified waterfall, which had troglodyte caves and a hospital in it. Those cliffs came down, tumbled down a very steep hill, and these houses are built into it. Our house was built in the 1500s. And right at the bottom of the house, when my husband said he wanted to move to Provence so our daughter would be bilingual and not have a childhood in London, central London, in Hackney, where we lived, I was very worried about the heat of Provence and the summers. And this is a house that has a cave at the bottom, which stays 19 degrees, whether it's really hot outside or really cold outside. And so I was able to work away in my cave. Next, please. And I was inspired really by the Provence countryside, by the walnuts and all sorts of things. There I am in my cave with dear old Booba, who passed away last month, and some of the pieces that I made there. And I only had natural light through the front doors onto the little tiny medieval street at the front. And I used to make all the work to bisque, and the electricity supply of the village was so remote that I couldn't rely on it to get to my high temperatures. So I'd pack all those pots up at biscuit once they'd been fired once to 1,000 degrees centigrade. And then I'd ship them to London, to my London studio, unpack them, glaze them, and then deliver them to Adrian Sassoon for his shows. Next, please. Wow, that was such a great time. Our daughter, age 11, couldn't read and write properly in English, which we have rectified. And this is Barcelona. This is the studio. There's the dog again. And this is the studio in Barcelona. And really, I'm just talking about this very fleetingly because my husband said, we must savor other cultures and we must learn and add to our vocabulary, if you like, and the spectrum of things that we experience. And it's he who moved us to Provence, he who moved us to Barcelona. And we weren't dragged there screaming and kicking, but it's difficult to change cultures, change languages, and to maintain ceramics. But when I look back at it now, you know, I was affected greatly by this Gothic quarter of Barcelona, and the pieces that I made then at that time, between 2009 and 2011, are very different to anything I could have dreamt of making. The same when we moved to Provence, and every time we go to India, it's kind of the same thing, looking for new influences, new lines, new sense of spirit, and the same sense of spirit, which is universal actually when you look at very beautiful things. Next, please. I'm going to whiz through these. So this is the TV series. BBC did a fantastic TV program. It's now recording series 4, and I was judged for series 1 and 2, and I pulled out for 3 and 4. I just let them get on with it. But here I am as Judge Kate, and I believe Love Productions, who made the series for the BBC, have just sold the whole series to America. So I think you'll be able to find it if you Google The Great Pottery Throwdown. You'll see me in my makeup, which I don't normally wear. You can see me looking quite judgely. And it really, 3.5 million people in England watched it live. One of the most favoured TV series of the year. And it's really made everybody appreciate and save that ceramics and understand it more and buy more and use it more at home and enjoy that fantastic thing of filling a beautiful pot with fruits when you bring your fruits back from the shop, and savouring things that you're about to cook with and things that you do cook and eat from. And that's been a great enhancement of the nation really savouring things. Next, please. Here we are, Judge Kate again in the middle. Next, please. And this is my husband, Graham, who built the houses that we lived in London himself, single-handedly, like a Grand Designs. I don't know if you have that program, but really everything but the electrics he does. But he also grinds all the pots. So there's a piece upside down, finished, in quite harsh conditions in London, in the East End, in our entranceway to our house, which is in disguise as an old house. But when you go through the doors behind him, it's a very lovely modern little building. And there he is grinding, and he really has been, you know, very, very key to my success, to our success, really. I've got an invisible partner, and there he is being invisible behind his mask. That was pre-COVID times. It was simply his health and safety where he's grinding. Next, please. And I'm aware that I'm running out of time. This is my dream, to do a story pot that's relevant to place, a storytelling pot. And I'm not sure if they've retired yet, but there are 2 gentlemen in Scandinavia where you can go and stay with them, and you build a pot as tall as this. This is probably about 4 meters high, 5 meters high. And then they build the kiln around it and fire it. I know when I last contacted them, they were saying they were going to stop. So I'm not sure if I missed that boat, but that's my dream really, is to make a giant storytelling pot. Next, please. And here we are, more dreams. Next, please. Little onion tea houses. This is a house in Stirling that I think is fantastic. I did not make that. It's a stone house. I'm sure some of you know it. You can go and stay in it, actually. I think it's National Trust House. But it's this symbol, this great rejoicing, this great savouring, really, of things. Next, please. And this is a storytelling room at the Jeffrey Museum. It was a temporary exhibition for 3 or 4 months. Edmund Duval made a white room, a porcelain room, a Mr. Minimalist room, and I made a Mrs. Maximalist room. And it's for telling stories. Next, please. And I've been telling you a story for an hour. And these are my heroes. Sandra Rhodes, Dame Sandra Rhodes, who was 80 the other day, who is the queen of colour and joy and hard work, great work ethic. She's on the right. And on the left is Andrew Logan, who was 75 the day before yesterday, actually. And we were in India together, and that's Holi, the festival of colour. And both Sandra and Andrew have this great exuberance and savouring of life. Andrew Logan's a very famous, great party giver. And Sandra is just such a generous and kind and sharing person. Really, she has inspired me to share all my techniques and my glaze recipes and all my research really openly with people. And in the centre is Mo Jupp, who was my teacher at college. I had 7 years of further education in ceramics in England, and he was my great mentor. Next, please. Sadly passed away. And this is about savouring. So these last couple of images, yeah, we got 4 left. This is in a funny little town called Eugene, and these are serious things that people pray to in the morning. I don't think they have been moved there. I think they're rocks that have then got surrounded by buildings and things. But these rather ridiculous and rather funny things are deeply spiritual, and you can see by the offerings that have been put on them by different people in the morning time, in the cool of the day in India. And you walk around India and you just come across these really funny and mad things. And that's one of the things that I like to do, is keep a sense of humor, keep fun. And I hope that I do that. Next, please. And really, here we are having a bit of fun at a fancy dress party. It was Andrew Logan's birthday, I think, and we had to go as our favorite color. And I went orange and my husband went as light, the bringer of all color. He was a lampshade, as you can see. Next, please. And here it is. This is the stuff. In fact, at the bottom there's some booba hairs, because Booba's hair, he was molting, revolting, and he always used to molt everywhere. And I noticed there were some booba hairs in there. But this is what it is, really. It's this salt of the earth, this clay of the earth that is so remarkable to dip your hands into, which I do very often. It's one of my favorite things to do, and then make these pots from. And I think, as I mentioned before, people who make with clay are connected automatically as one big community, and that we truly have to savor. Next, please. I'm not quite sure I know the next project. This is a bit embarrassing, but I thought I'd put it in because I got, as Linda mentioned, look at that ridiculous hat. Prince Charles gave me an MBE medal at Buckingham Palace last year. Took my dad and my husband and my daughter, and it was for my services to ceramics. And I think we all have to try and savor our community. Next slide, please. I did the most hysterical, ridiculous curtsy bow when I stepped back from Prince Charles that I'm embarrassed about to this day. Here we are savoring the combination really of food and pots. And please do look at my Instagram, do look at my website, dig deep into my website. There are films, all sorts of films, and you can go into my sketchbooks and things. And yeah, gosh, what a joy it is to have savored that with you.
I can't thank you enough. I wish you could come and see the exhibition.
Oh, so do I wish I could.
And just hope that people are all safe. Hope to see you maybe in June in London, fingers crossed.